Hello everybody. Today I have a pretty long video for you, but it's well worth watching because I think there's a lot of back and forth and it's just a very neat game to kind of watch through. So this is against my guildmate BT Cursive, and I'm playing a deck that focuses on creating items, allies out of items, or as I like to call it, an animation deck. And so I go ahead and first I sacrifice Leander. Leander's a unique ally, and when you have two unique allies in hand, it almost always pays off to sacrifice one of your unique allies because you can't have multiple unique allies on the board. And especially in this deck, we actually want to keep items in our hand, and that will come apparent later, but we really want to be using items for the most part, and so that is another reason why it's okay to sacrifice an ally here. So our opponent is playing Baduru. I'm really concerned about a Mercenary here. This is before Mercenary was banned on the on Quick Match. Now, let me pause for a second. This deck is a little bit slower, so we still have to play Scrapyard Recycler on turn 2. It's the only thing we can really play, and we sacrifice one of them because I'm expecting to have this Scrapyard Recycler be on the field for a while, and you can't have multiple of the same artifact in play. So Scrapyard Recycler is a very spammable item, though. As long as you have an item in your graveyard, you can make it awaken, but the only issue is we don't have any items in our graveyard yet. So that is more of a late game thing, and that's why I actually sacrificed it early there. So luckily, our opponent doesn't have an early mercenary. They play the captured foe, or sorry, camouflaged foe. They played the camouflaged foe, which means for our deck, that's actually really good for us because our deck really excels at basically not needing to summon any allies at all. So I'm totally fine with the camouflage foe because I won't need to summon any allies. I can make allies with my animation strategy. Now I sacrifice Thoughtful Investment there because we can actually bring it out with Aramia's ability. So that is one reason to sacrifice it. I think playing it for 3 resources can be a little bit of a tempo loss, and if we can bring it out with Aramia anyway, then we can do other stuff on our turn while still getting the resource. We play the Wand of Izikus, sorry. We play the Wand of Izikus there because of the fact that, well, you'll see in a bit. We sacrifice our other Leander because we don't want that camouflaged foe to ever go off. So here we go ahead and summon that Thoughtful Investment that I mentioned before. We're going to sacrifice the Suspended Animation for to put us on 5 resources. We sacrifice Suspended Animation because Suspended Animation needs items in the graveyard again, and also it's only really good if your opponent has a lot of allies out, which our opponent doesn't have any allies out yet. Other than this Cruel Trapper, which we're going to kill with Shadowbolt. And then that allows us to use Wand of Izikus. So I do want to go over this card because this is a card that is very rarely seen, but it is very, very strong. For 1 Shadow Energy, you can target an item, and it becomes an ally with 2 attack and 4 health. Now, this on its own is pretty decent when combined with cards like Thoughtful Investment, because Thoughtful Investment is an artifact that basically just sits on your board doing nothing, and then Wand of Izikus allows you to actually make use of that useless item and turn it into an ally, which is really, really powerful and very strong. So that's why we are doing that there. And that's going to give us this ally on board. I might have considered saving the pendant because actually what's going to happen is if our opponent uses their pendant to destroy our pendant, then we can't blow up our opponent's weapon. So maybe we should have saved the pendant. Now, on the other hand, I kind of like the fact that we were able to get the pendant out of the way. So it wasn't, a complete loss there. But that is something that I could have definitely considered, given that now we have no out to this Emor crossbow. So here we go ahead. Okay, I actually missed what I sacrificed. So, but really we had to sacrifice something to summon the ice wall here, and this is what glues the deck together. So I do want to pause for a second. Engineer's Harness is another card you may not know about. You activate its ability for 1 durability, and until the end of the turn, whenever something becomes an ally, an item becomes an ally under your control, it gains 1 base attack and +2 health. Now this is pretty huge, and that means when you use stuff like Living Ice Wall and Wand of Izikus, they now become very strong allies. Now we have a 3/7 and a 3/6, which is very formidable. So Engineer's Harness basically turns everything into real threats. And then I wanted to talk a little bit more about why we went to 6 resources there, got a little bit greedy with our sacrifices. Well, the reason is Scrapyard Recycler takes an item from our graveyard back to our hand at the end of the turn if we have no cards in hand. So in this deck, you generally want to go and be handless at the end of the turn if you have Recycler out, because that lets you get that free artifact, and that's a huge amount of advantage that you can get. So our opponent goes ahead and uses Deepwood Wraith, which is very strong there to return the card that we had. Now I chose not to sacrifice there because I figured we could just I wanted to sacrifice the Thoughtful Investment with the Thoughtful Investment, and I didn't want to necessarily I didn't want to I wanted more options basically for sacrifices. Arguably, I could have easily sacrificed at the start of the turn here. I almost regret a little bit that I didn't do that, but I also wanted to keep the Living Ice Wall, and so it isn't all that bad. So we go here for another Shadowbolt to get rid of that Wraith, and yeah, sadly, our Wand of Izikus is no more. So, looks like our opponent here is well, they play another Camouflaged Foe, but again, we are not going to be playing any of our allies, so that is not that bad for us. Now, I do want to talk about Engineer's Harness and Suspended Animation. It turns out that Engineer's Harness no longer buffs Suspended Animation because of a wording change that was made in a recent update. Essentially, Engineer's Harness says when an item becomes an ally under your control, and when an item from your field becomes an item under your control, that is considered becoming an ally. Suspended Animation says return to play, and so that is not considered becoming an ally. And for that reason, Suspended Animation is not gonna our Wand of Izikus that we return to the field is not gonna get buffed. And that is really too bad there, because it would have been very nice to make that a 3/5 ally. So that is just something to be aware about if you play this deck. I do think that may be changed in the future, because the intention, at least, the design-wise, is that cards like Suspended Animation are going to work with Engineer's Harness. Anyway, here we go for Wand of Izikus, and we can turn our Thoughtful Investment into a 3-attack 6-health ally. And this is just what we want to be doing against, especially Baduru, just applying a lot of pressure and by playing a lot of allies, so that it's a little bit tough for our opponent to basically start attacking our face, which would be the major issue here. So I go ahead and the reason this Thoughtful Investment doesn't get healed is because Mending Golem heals damage, and Thoughtful Investment's health was set to 1. So actually, that was a little bit of a misplay on my part. I could have easily healed the hero there, but it did nothing to my Thoughtful Investment. So yeah, I go ahead and I discard Ice Wall with Mending Golem because I can bring it back at the end of the turn with my Recycling Golem. The reason, okay, I actually forgot to talk about this. The reason I made Engineer's Harness an ally there is because actually Engineer's Harness's ability only is active while that armor is in play. It's very similar to Necromancer's Shroud if you're familiar with that interaction. So you cannot activate Engineer's Harness when it has only 1 durability, because then it will be sent to the graveyard, and if you try to make an ally out of an item, it won't trigger because it's no longer on the field. So that's why when it's on 1 durability, you want to be making Engineer's Harness into an ally. So here we go, and we can sacrifice our duplicate Wand of Izikus there. We won't be needing multiples. Here, yeah, so I wanted to summon the Darklight Apprentice, but I decided not to because of the camouflaged foe that I don't want to trigger, and instead I can discard it with Mending Golem. One other thing about this is Gorlak actually heals himself by 1 when he kills an ally in combat, so that's why I had to attack with the Engineer's Harness first, and why I took face damage by attacking with Wand of Izikus, and now I can clear it with my 2 remaining allies. So when Thoughtful Investment gets killed, Gorlak heals 1, but then we're able to clear it with our allies. And now we're going to heal back up our Engineer's Harness ally, and just, play our Living Ice Wall, and things are looking good now. I'm pretty comfortable in this position. Now, of course, against Baduru, you always have to be a little bit careful, because Baduru can bring out that free weapon, and that can be pretty strong. So we're not quite out of the woods yet, but we are looking pretty good. I choose not to sacrifice there because I figured that it would be better if I sacrifice with Thoughtful Investment again and just give myself more options. Now, arguably, maybe that was a little bit of a mistake here, but yeah, that is why essentially I did not sacrifice. And maybe a little bit of a mistake because Darklight Apprentice is something we need to get out of our hand, and the only way to get it out of our hand is to summon it, and that's going to let our opponent have Camouflaged Foe, basically. So not totally ideal there, but we can deal with the Camouflaged Foe. It's not the end of the world because we can attack into it with our allies and such. And I go ahead and I just damage the Snowland Spotter a little bit. I figure that just damaging it now means I can, on my next turn, kill it a little bit easier. So yeah. Now, our opponent is able to clear our board, essentially, with the Grundler's Double, and so that is a pretty good turn for them. So again, I don't sacrifice. I just want more options. I don't want to be locked into anything. So that is why I did that. And thankfully, that means we can summon our Living Ice Wall. Drawing into that Engineer's Harness was very crucial there because now we've got some very strong allies. And we're going to go ahead and kill that Snowland Spotter just to, give us some more breathing room. Now, this is one of the things that we do struggle with is fatties like Drangus. So really what we want right now is something like Shadowbolt, because that is the main way that we can deal with a fatty. Under this situation, it's actually really difficult for us to deal with this Drangus. So right now we're just stalling. We're going to use Engineer's Harness, play this Living Ice Wall as a 3/7 ally, and make our 1 durability Wand of Izikus into a 3/6 ally, and we're just stalling. We know the Living Ice Wall is going to get killed by the Baduru here, but we need to kind of wait out until we can draw our Shadowbolt, which can actually out this Drangus for us. So our opponent goes ahead and kills our Wand of Izikus, which is a good move on their part to just kind of clear our board there. So we get Stun Turret. Now Stun Turret is amazing in this deck because we actually can seek it with Aramia, but even just drawing into it is great, and that lets us kill that Slithering Viper with Stealth, which is very crucial here. I go ahead and blow up the Emor Crossbow with the Pendant, so that way we can just be a little bit safer against the weapon. Of course, our opponent has another one, so it doesn't end up actually doing much to blow it up, but actually it does make our opponent waste a turn essentially to play the Emor Crossbow. So it's not that bad. So here we go ahead and we actually, so the reason I did that, okay, let me pause. The reason I used the Stun Turret there is because Drankus has a passive that gives Hunter allies +1 attack. So if we did not stun turret it, the camouflaged foe would be a 3-5 right now. But luckily, we're able to make it a 2-4, and that saves the damage on Leander, which actually turns out to be kind of important. So, so yeah, that is a good thing to be aware about. I end up passing without attacking with Wand of Izikus because anything I attack will be counterattacked and basically, yeah, not be ideal because of that. So, yeah, our opponent is able to basically take out our Wand of Izikus. Now, we use Leander. Leander's other ability is really helpful. So, the Leander is a very important card in this deck because Leander lets you draw a card whenever, once per turn, when an ally becomes an item becomes an ally. Now, because Leander's other activated ability lets you basically look at the top 3 cards of your deck and rearrange them, then that is a very nice ability, and that's what's letting us know that Shadowbolt is on top of our deck. We're going to use Scrapyard Recycler to draw the Shadowbolt. Shadowbolt the Drangus, which is very helpful for us. I would have liked to kill the camouflaged foe, but Mercenary is very important to get rid of, especially in this kind of matchup. Now that we don't have Scrapyard Recycler out, it may have not been wise to discard the Engineer's Harness, but I want to make sure Leander lives, because Leander is a great way to draw cards and look at the top cards of your deck, so that is why I go ahead and use the Mending Golem on Leander there. So our opponent is able to clear our Leander and takes out the Engineer's Harness. I think they might have been better off damaging maybe one of our Scrapyard Recyclers, but if you notice, our opponent is running out of cards in their deck, so I think that is a contributing factor there for sure, because you definitely don't want to be running out of cards. If you are low on cards, you kind of have to make very aggressive moves and hope you can close out the game quickly because you're going to run out of resources very fast. And yeah, but at this point in the game, now our opponent has officially run out of resources, and we still have cards in our deck, so that is going to be a deciding factor here. And yeah, that is basically gonna do it for this deck. So we summon a ton of items, then we turn them all into allies, and that is basically, yeah, the deck. Yeah. So here I think the game is largely over. Our opponent makes a very impressive last push there to take out a lot of our allies. So we don't sacrifice the Tome of Knowledge or anything because we can turn it into an ally with Izikus. And then we can make our Living Ice Walls. Now, Augmenting Golem is another really nice card, especially against a weapon hero like Bduru. It gives all your allies +1 health, essentially. Any allies that cost 4 or less, but all of our allies are going to cost 4 or less. And yeah, our opponent runs out of resources, and that's how we're able to finally close out the game. And that's what you'll find a lot of times with this deck. You actually kind of win by just summoning so many allies that your opponent can deal with them, but you will be able to just keep playing more and more items into allies, and you get the recycling from Scrapyard Recycler, so you do often win in the late game, unless you're able to make a very huge push that your opponent can't board clear or something. Anyway, here's the deck. We're running only 3 apprentices. I used to be running 4, but I didn't want to run too many allies in this deck. I think this deck runs best when you're low on allies. Now, Apprentice is an amazing turn 2 play, especially in combination with Living Ice Wall. The reason we run 3 Living Ice Wall is because of the Apprentice into Living Ice Wall combo that gives you an additional Shadow Energy, which is really, really great. But also for the Leander combo on turn 4. You can play the Living Ice Wall on turn 3, Leander on turn 4, activate the Ice Wall, and draw a card off of Leander. And that is an amazing, amazing play Even a very aggressive deck often struggles to clear the Ice Wall and then the Leander, which is 11 damage that they have to deal. So that is why we run the 4 Ice Walls, 3 Apprentices, and 4 Leanders. Leander is the kind of card that you want to be seeing every game, but you can sacrifice it in certain situations, as you just saw in our last game. Suspended Animation is a card I really want to run 4 of. I think you can easily run 4 of this, but because of the fact that there was that ruling change that basically makes it so that it no longer gets buffed from Engineer's Harness, it is a little less good. And sometimes you want a better board clear that will just permanently clear the board, and Supernova does the job very well, especially since we do run Mending Golem. So if you are low on health, you can use Mending Golem to heal yourself back up. Now, we only run 2 Mending Golems, but Mending Golem can be returned from the graveyard with Scrapyard Recycler. And so that's why for some of these items that are very good, but you don't want to see all the time necessarily, we only run 2 of them just to keep our deck count low, but you will eventually, even if you activate them and use them and they become allies, they will eventually get recycled by Scrapyard Recycler. So you can run a low count of very strong items in this deck. So Thoughtful Investment is a 4 of, because Thoughtful Investment combos just so well with Wand of Izikus. These 2 cards are an amazing together. It just gives you the resource advantage, and then turning it into an ally is just really amazing. So we run 4 of those, 4 of the Izikus, 4 of the Recyclers, which are very strong as a 2 cost for a 3/3. That's very good. The only catch is you need an item in your graveyard, and being able to recycle everything in your graveyard is amazing too. I used to run 3 Tome of Knowledge, but I bumped it up to 4 just because you do want to see it often, and it also can be turned into an ally with Wand of Izikus if you draw into too many. We run the 1 Pendant. It can be searched in a desperate situation, so that's really nice. And this is the key card of the deck, in my opinion. Now, I've seen other people play animation decks, and they often don't run 4 copies of Engineer's Harness, but in my opinion, it's a must-of at 4. I've tried it at 3, I've tried it at 2, and I just didn't like it. Because I really want to be seeing this card. This is what's going to be making your allies that are, your items that become allies, so strong. And so this is really one of the heart and souls of the deck, because this is what makes all your cards that much stronger. And yes, it is kind of weird. It's not as flexible maybe. I've seen this card a lot, and this is a card that I'm not running, but a lot of people choose to run The Last Harvest. If you think about it, The Last Harvest is way worse than Engineer's Harness, because The Last Harvest costs 3 to buff your allies by +1/+1, whereas Harness buffs it by +1/+2, and you only have to pay the 3 cost 1 time. After that, you can use it every turn and not have to pay resources. And so that's why I really like Engineer's Harness over The Last Harvest. I think Engineer's Harness is a much better card in this deck. So yes, it's not an artifact, it doesn't have that artifact synergy, and it's an armor so your opponent can attack into it and destroy it, and it will eventually lose all its durability, but it just works so well in this deck, and I found it to be very, very strong. Anyway, yeah, that pretty much does it for this deck list. So where would I say this deck is in terms of competitive or meme? I would say this is kind of like a fun deck, but it's not a meme deck. And the difference is that a meme deck is a deck that is probably not going to be winning games that often, whereas a fun deck is a deck that is capable of winning games and will win you games, but you're not going to bring it to a tournament probably. You're probably not going to be playing it as your main deck that you're trying to climb rated with. So if you're looking for some fun games, if you're looking for a strategy that is really, really unique and something that is very, I guess, novel and something that can catch your opponent off guard, this is one to try. Okay, I do want to do one more thing. I do talk about this in my other Nishaven video, but you could also consider running Voice of Winter in this deck. I've seen players run Voice of Winter in this style of deck, and another card that I want to highlight that is also something that I've seen played a lot in this style of deck is, let me find it. Okay, it is Uragon's Fang. Uragon's Fang is amazing because it's an artifact, and when you damage an ally in combat, you can freeze it for a turn. So you basically turn your Wimpy Wisent's, or sorry, Wand of Izikus into a ankle breaker. So Uragon's Fang is really, really great. I'm not running it because I just don't focus on that in this deck. I'm really focused on making big allies and not so much on the freeze strategy. But there is another variant of this deck that really leans into freezing all your opponent's allies and taking advantage of the fact that all your items that are becoming allies basically bypass Voice of Winter. So yeah, this is a very flexible deck, something you can definitely try out. And yeah, okay, actually, one last thing. I promise this is the last thing. Transporting Golem is a card I'm not running in this deck because I figure that it awakens at the start of your turn, so it doesn't actually synergize all that well with Engineer's Harness. And that's really why I think it's a very good card, but I would rather run the Thoughtful Investment Wand of Izikus combo. Okay, anyway, this video has gone on for long enough, so that's the deck. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. Yeah, so is this a deck that you've seen before or played with before? Yeah, let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.